Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace and blessed beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So I think we can conclude that Jeff is not coming today. So Haima will continue to serve as our reader, bless her heart. So there's Stephen Poitier. Namaste and good day, Stephen.
Namaste.
So welcome to our class and discussion, reading and discussion of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as presented to us in his book, How to Know God, by Swami Prabhavananda and Christopher Isherwood. The Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, of course, are aphoristic. They need unfolding, unpacking. And so the Swami has interpreted the Yoga Sutras and commented on them. And I think we can all agree it's been a profound experience to study what it is that is presented to us by Patanjali as understood and presented by Prabhavananda and Isherwood. So is there anything left from last week that anyone would like to bring up? Anything that after thinking about it during the week you think, well, perhaps I need a clarification, or I wished I had made my own personal comment about this, or anything of the kind, anything from anyone. All right.
Actually, brother, I have something, but it's from a little further back.
All right, Stephen, just go right ahead.
Actually, it's Glenn.
But, Glenn.
But we were talking, or it's lately me because I'm trying to catch up. But earlier in the book, we were talking about that dreams are memory. And so I was trying to understand how, if dreams are memory, that dreams don't correspond to any kind of waking reality. And the only thing I could come up with is they are produced from fictional events like TV stories that the brain interprets as real memories.
Well, the understanding is that our mind is a storehouse of mental impressions. These can come from anywhere and do come from anywhere and everywhere. Any and everything we experience, we're told, by the Upanishads, by Swami Vivekananda, by Sri Ramakrishna, any and everything we experience is stored as a mental impression. It's not in our heads. That's not where the mind is. The mind is in the etheric egg that surrounds us. And this that exists within our head is a transceiver. So the mind stuff exists in the etheric egg and every cell of our body. Every cell of our body has memory, as well as, because it's part of the mind stuff, has these memories or mental impressions. The thing about the dream world is it is inherently totally discontinuous. So is, and incoherent. So is this one once we awaken and realize it. But we, because of our ability to knit together from the actions of the gunas on our samskaras, our mental impressions, we're able to knit together this sense of continuity. So yes, dreams are indeed all these memories or mental impressions. And if you want to understand dreams more profoundly, study the work of C.G. Jung, Carl Jung. Swami Prabhavananda was a great admirer of Carl Jung and his research into the nature of the mind, and especially about the significance of dreams. But dreams are another world. There are three worlds: waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep, or the waking state, our active subconscious, and our latent subconscious or unconscious. They're each a different realm, and they have their own ways of being and doing. Again, you can learn to be a lucid dreamer and control the content of your dreams. And according to Don Juan Matus, the great Yaqui teacher, Brujo, out of the Toltec tradition, there's great power in learning to do this. Patanjali also talks about that, but there's also great danger. That is to say, you can get hypnotized by your own power and use it for selfish purposes, which immediately leads you down the whirlpool into distraction and misery. So that's probably enough about that. Anything else, Glenn? Was that a satisfactory answer?
But did I hear you say basically that our waking state would start to lose continuity?
Well, it is. Once you have awakened, you see that what is occurring is kind of a motion picture or play. And as we know about motion pictures and plays, they're made of bits and pieces stuck together to create what appears to be a coherent whole. But the fact is, we're making that coherence. The playwright gives us the suggestions and the tools to do it with, the playwright or screenwriter. But even a film that is as narrative in its development as the film Harvey, which is about this man's relationship with a fairy being called a puka that appears as a giant rabbit. It's a very narrative film. One thing leads to another very nicely. But if you look at it dispassionately, at the end you see that it is knit together of just bits and pieces. Well, so is our waking awareness. And when we fully occupy that witness seat, we become cognizant of the fact that this is just happening in front of us, this thing, that thing, bits and pieces of a discontinuous dream. The reason it's so compelling and so convincing is that it has the power of Brahman. It is the power of Brahman that creates this dream. I am one, I shall body myself forth as many. And as Vashishta says, at that point, the dream began. But it is nothing more, he says, than a vibration of consciousness. And there's nothing continuous or coherent about it. We create, we as the projector of our universe or reality, we create it. And as we'll discover as we read on in Patanjali, when we learn to still all of the mental modifications or thought waves in the mind stuff, that universe disappears, that dream disappears. What replaces it cannot be described because there is no mind there. There is no recorder of the state of being that you're in. But it is a transformative state.
Hi, Brother Shankara. Can I add something? One thing.
Please do.
Yeah. So what I observed is that the impact of combining all the moments of this awakening state, and it's not living at it like moment by moment, is the state of wonder. Like for example, I get up in the morning. It's like I know this is my bed. I know this is where my clock is, where my phone is. This is my wife. Rather than waking up in a state of wonder, wow, this is my bed, like this is the moment I woke up, wow, this is the day, like today, like Monday, wow, it's beautiful Monday morning. I act like I know it all and
Yes.
carry on with life rather than like being in that moment of, wow, I woke up alive this moment, like that.
Yes.
That's what happens when we have the memory, and so seeing it as a like big story rather than being in the moment.
Yes.
Just wanted to add that.
The Buddha was very clear about this. The Buddha says, you are not the person that you were a moment ago. It is discontinuous. It is this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment. And as you said, you wake up and you knit all that together. This is my bed, this is my cloth, this is my phone, this is my wife. All of that seems to be a coherent picture. So thank you. Thank you so much, Somesh. Anyone else? All right, so this harks back. Bhaskar, did you have something?
Yeah, I was kind of trying to go back to the five types of vrittis of mental modification. And I'm trying to understand, Patanjali did break it up into 5 categories, of which we do have sleep. So just does dream fall within the mental modification of sleep? Or dream is verbal delusion, which is the other vritti, or is it part of memory? And what is really to take away from here?
Dream is part of sleep. We can dream when we're awake also, daydream. We can go into that second world when we're awake, but we're not precisely awake in the ordinary sense. That's why it's called a daydream. And it's a very potent creative moment, it can be, these daydreams. But dreaming is part of the sleep state. But it is only part. There's dreaming, and then there's dreamless sleep. Dreamless sleep is not unconsciousness, though we call it unconscious in modern English. It's really not unconscious at all. The brainwave researchers have discovered that there are long form waves, I believe they're called delta waves. Don't correct me if I'm wrong. These long form waves that very closely resemble the waves, the mind, the waves that occur in the minds of people who are meditating. And they occur in the same part of the mind, which means that we are in a state, when we're in that latent subconscious state, we have access to this meditative state, and we go into a kind of samadhi. This is why we wake up refreshed. But the difference between doing that and doing it as yoga nidra, yoga sleep, is that we are aware when we're doing it as yoga sleep that we are having this experience of samadhi or spiritual immersion or ecstasy. So no, we don't need to think that the dreams come from some other. They definitely come from the mental modifications that existed before and are recorded in our memory. Every instant since we first had any kind of consciousness at all, which was a long, long, long time ago, that's all recorded here for each of us. This Vivekananda is very clear about that in his talks on Jnana Yoga and Maya.
Well, Brother Sakura, I'd like to share something. I don't know if it's appropriate for this, for Vedanta, but years ago, I was working on a process of studying of how to connect the dream experience with the waking experience in order to make it one thing that would consist equally, and because what we do, we forget our dreams, most of them. We remember some of them, but we forget most of them. And we're in an astral state, which is really goes into some other things that the reason I was reluctant about sharing this, it goes into a lot of things, but I just wanted to give that idea. That's something that I studied a while ago, and it helps you to be understanding of the death experience. It helps you to be understanding of out-of-body experiences.
Yes, this is it sounds like, though you haven't said the words, it sounds like what you were studying was a form of lucid dreaming, a way of lucid dreaming, so that there is no separation in your continuity of consciousness between your waking state and your dream state. The only separation occurs when you go into that dreamless sleep or latent subconscious state where the knower disappears. That's as it does in samadhi. So though there is consciousness there, so it sounds like what you were studying was like lucid dreaming. And in lucid dreaming, you indeed can do what you call out-of-body experiences, astral projection. All of this is well known in the lore of yoga and in the lore of Don Juan Matus, the teacher of Carlos Castaneda, that we had a class on some time back, a series of classes. So yes, it's relevant to what we're discussing. It's not relevant especially to the part of the book that we're about to read part of, but it is definitely part of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, both from these earlier passages, and then in the third chapter that we'll get to, the chapter on powers, these things are discussed in some detail. Why? Swami Vivekananda says Patanjali could not leave it out because he was not a philosopher, he was a scientist. And so he was formulating this workbook of the science of Raja Yoga. And he could not leave out these psychic powers. They're not spiritual powers, they're psychic powers. And so he included them and warned about their danger of becoming entranced and self-serving, actualizing some of our deep, deep, deep desires that usually only appear to us in dreams and shock us. We may discover them also in meditation. As Swami Prabhupada pointed out, sometimes we'll be shocked at what we find in the contents of even our waking awareness, our active subconscious.
Yeah, you described it very accurately.
Oh, good. All right. Yes. So anything else from anyone before we begin our reading? This is very productive. This is exactly, we need to understand these things in order to understand what Patanjali says to us now and later about the mind, how it works, and why it is so hard to subdue it. Why it is so hard for us to be in that state where there are no mental modifications or vrittis in the citta, the mind stuff. It's because there are so many aspects to this body-mind complex, the antakarana. Anything else before Haima begins the reading? All right, dears, thank you for participating in that and for being part of it. Haima?
Okay, sure, Brother Shankar. Good morning and namaste, everybody. We are on page 164 of Swami Prabhupada and Christopher Isherwood, How to Know God. That is Sutra number 45, number 2, page 2 of Sutra number 45. I am going to start with the Jnana Yoga. We read a little bit. I don't know whether we discussed much, but I will start from there on 164. Jnana Yoga is the path of intellectual discrimination, the way of finding Brahman through analysis of real nature of phenomena. The Jnana Yogi rejects all that is transient and apparent and superficial.
Now let's just pause right there just for a minute.
Sure.
Notice that what the Swami says is the Jnana Yogi rejects all of it, all that is transient, which means all that we can know or experience through the body, mind, and senses. Rejects all of it. This is why there are so few real jnanis. If you're going to live that way and reject all of it, your life becomes very limited indeed in terms of the world we live in now. And you don't need to go live in a cave to do it. I've known one real jnani, and of course we have the stories of Nisargadatta Maharaj, who was a real jnani and who lived a householder's life, but completely apart from the world and rejecting everything of transient phenomena except those people who came to him for instruction. And then, if they would listen, he would tell them something very useful to them. So, I know I very quickly interrupted Haima, but I wanted to note to everyone that it really does say all transient phenomena, which is everything that we can know.
So what happens if Sri Ramakrishna pinches one on the butt?
Well, this is the story. People would come to him and claim to be jnanis and say the world is unreal. They would say that, they would be posturing in this way.
So,
So Ramakrishna would pinch them on the butt.
so the true,
And they would say, ouch.
but the true Jnana Yoga wouldn't react.
He would not react. Well, he wouldn't even be there with Sri Ramakrishna. He would never come to Sri Ramakrishna. What would he be doing there?
Because he wouldn't be real either.
Well, as Sri Ramakrishna says, if we look at Shakti, if we look at the world of time, space, and causation, even the Divine Mother becomes unsubstantial like a dream. These are his very words. Even the Divine Mother, even Kali, becomes unsubstantial like a dream. If we look at it from the real jnana perspective.
So do they just keep on this path until they end up in Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
They're not the least bit interested in samadhi. It's not a question of they're not interested in Savikalpa Samadhi or Nirvikalpa Samadhi or any kind of samadhi. They may end up there, but when one dissolves the mind or annihilates the mind, as the jnani is said to do, then there's nothing there to have any experience. They may remain embodied, most of them do not. They lose the body. Most real jnanis first of all, they don't take very good care of themselves as physical beings. So the jnana path is very difficult for us to understand. Very difficult. How can we reject all transient phenomena? And there's a book that you can read. It's a very, very good book, very dense, very difficult, but it's called Nectar of Supreme Knowledge. It's a translation of something written in Bengali by an illumined soul of a Ramakrishna Order Swami in the Himalayas. He wrote it for the other Ramakrishna Order monks so that they would understand Jnana Yoga. Swami Sarvadevananda determined that it would be good for, as Prabhupada did with his books, Sarvadevananda determined it would be good for the students of Vedanta now to know this really quintessential description of Jnana Yoga, of Advaita Vedanta. And so he translated the Bengali into English, very painstaking project over 4 or 5 years, and published it as Nectar of Supreme Knowledge. You can find that book. And if you wish to find out what jnanis really believe and how they really behave, that book will tell you. And as I said, it's very dense, very difficult, because most of us and necessarily continue to operate from the left mind. The left mind simply does not understand why anyone would want to annihilate it, let alone agree that it should be done. Does that make sense? Okay. Please start over, Haima, and I'll see if I can be quiet for a while.
Sure, no problem, Brother Shankar. We need that explanation. The Jnana Yogi rejects all that is transient and apparent and superficial, saying, not this, and so comes at length to Brahman by the process of elimination. This is a difficult path, calling for tremendous powers of will and clarity of mind. It's not for ordinary people, but it has attracted and made saints of many remarkable men and women who would otherwise not have embraced religion in any form. Now we're moving
And it is
towards,
a question whether Advaita Vedanta can be spoken of as religion in any form.
now we are moving towards Raja Yoga.
Okay, let's see. Is
Any
there
questions about this?
any
Yes.
comments or concerns or questions about this before we leave behind the subject of Jnana Yoga or Advaita Vedanta? All right, good.
Okay.
Uh,
Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is often called the yoga of meditation. It's not so easy to define as the other yogas, since, in a sense, it combines all of them. For meditation may include God-dedicated action, that is ritual worship, discrimination, and concentration upon a chosen aspect of God. Raja Yoga is also concerned with the study of the body as a vehicle of spiritual energy. It describes, for example, the nature and function of the various psychic centers, such as the lotus of the heart, already referred to in chapter 1, aphorism number 36. Since Raja Yoga stresses the value of formal scientific meditation, it is primarily for those who desire to lead monastic or at least predominantly contemplative lives. But it should certainly be studied by every spiritually minded person. It teaches us the importance of technique in prayer. Needless to say, these categories should not be too strictly applied to distinguish between the varieties of spiritual temperament. One yoga cannot be practiced to the entire exclusion of the others.
mhm.
No one who follows a truly religious path can do so without love, discrimination, and dedicated action.
This
No
is why Swami Vivekananda says, each soul is potentially divine. That is to say, the energy of your true original nature exists within the soul, like energy exists in a car battery. When you learn how to connect the poles of a car battery, you can the energy comes out and is useful to you. When you learn how to connect the poles, so to speak, of your true original nature, your soul, then it becomes manifest to you. So Swami Vivekananda said, each soul is potentially divine. The goal of human life is to manifest this divinity within through the control of nature, both internal and external. Actually, he says external and internal. So I'll repeat that. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal of human life is to manifest this divinity within through the control of nature, both external and internal. Do this through work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, one or more or all four of these, and be free. All else having to do with spiritual life, and he goes through a catalog, all else having to do with spiritual life are secondary details. So work, that's karma yoga. worship, bhakti yoga, psychic control, raja yoga, philosophy, jnana yoga. So this is what the Swami means when it's hard to draw a line between these two, a line of demarcation, because their workbooks overlap necessarily. And if you read the workbook of Jnana Yoga or Advaita Vedanta, which is Adi Shankaracharya's crest jewel of discrimination, you'll see that there's a great deal that overlaps with both Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga. There's even some aspects of Bhakti Yoga in that you must be devoted to Brahman even before you know Brahman. You something within you has a devotion to it. So there's even the Bhakti component. If you study Narada's Bhakti Sutras, which is the workbook for devotional yoga, Bhakti Yoga, you'll find that there's a tremendous amount that has to do with Karma Yoga that is identified by Sri Krishna in the Gita as Karma Yoga, and a tremendous amount having to do with Raja Yoga as defined by Patanjali. And then, of course, the workbook for Karma Yoga is really Sri Krishna's Bhagavad Gita, chapters 2 through 6, specifically, though it's alluded to throughout the book. So this is what the Swami means. So Haima, please read those lines over again about the 4 yogas together.
Sure. One yoga cannot be practiced to the entire exclusion of the others. No one who follows a truly religious path can do so without love, discrimination, and dedicated action. No one can dispense with meditation altogether. Love without discrimination lapses into sentimentality. Discrimination without love leads to spiritual pride. And we are all involved in action like fire in smoke. Christianity, for example, is preeminently a bhakti approach to God, yet among its saints, we find such jnana types as Thomas Aquinas and such karma yogis as Vincent de Paul. It's all a matter of emphasis. And in the last analysis, each one of us has his or her own particular blend of yogas. But the observance of the limbs of yoga is essential, no matter which yoga one follows.
So read that last line again. The observance of the limbs of yoga.
But the observance of the limbs of yoga is essential, no matter which yoga one follows.
So in other words, he's saying Raja Yoga is foundational, and its 8 limbs or 6 limbs that are the limbs of self-effort are necessary in order to really dive deep within, which is the whole point of any of these yogas.
Totally agree with you, Brother Shankara. With the personal experience, I totally agree.
Yes, thank you, dear.
We're going to forget we heard that first line until after your talk tomorrow.
Well, you'll hear it echoed tomorrow for sure.
It's a good topic tomorrow. You want me to move on, Brother Shankara?
If there's nothing else from anyone,
Okay.
I was just
Sure.
waiting to see if there was any
Okay.
follow-up to what
I
you were saying.
wanted to go back to the previous paragraph and the last sentence of the previous paragraph says, it teaches us the importance of technique in prayer. This is about Raja Yoga. So I'm just trying to understand what that means.
Prayer can be either focused or unfocused. If it's unfocused, it probably will not yield much, because control of intention and attention are necessary to bring the full energy of your yearning to the prayer. There's no sense praying if there isn't some yearning behind it.
Yes.
How to bring this yearning to focus? This is what's meant by the technique of prayer. And so if you see the most powerful prayers, Oma Satoma Satkamaya, for example, it's very short, very condensed, and yet it contains all the yearning that we could ask for. Lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness to light, lead us from death to immortality. And then Swami Prabhupada would always add the Abir Moiti, which means bring thy shining presence within us, within me. So it's an appeal to the divine being that we're praying to not just do these things for us, but be present within us. So that's a very disciplined prayer. If we look at the Jesus prayer, it's very short, but it is extremely potent. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. It's both a prayer and a mantra. The reason it's a mantra is because it has two what are called seed words. The first is the word Christ, which is as potent a seed word as there is within Western language, Christos. And then the word mercy. Mercy is a word that we just don't understand well until we've repeated it for some time in repeating that prayer. Then we see how disciplined that prayer is. So there's one from Sanskrit, there's one from Latin. I gave the English translation of both. That are very disciplined prayers. Now, does that mean we should never do unfocused prayer, where we just pour out our heart to whatever divine presence we wish to address ourselves to? No, doesn't mean that at all. There's no dogma about this. But that kind of prayer would be what Swami Vivekananda would call a secondary detail. If you do it each day, every day for some time, pour out your heart, of course the divine presence will hear and will respond. But it's like a child crying because it's hurt. First, you have to get the child to calm down enough to tell you where and why it hurts. Does that make sense, Bhaskar?
It does.
I just want to add one thing to this, Brother Shankara. It teaches the importance of technique in prayer. Can you all hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I realized that is very true, the technique in prayer, because when I started first 20 plus years ago with the body yoga, all the hatha yoga, I started focusing on my body, how gently I could switch from one pose to another. Then I added pranayama. Then I started focusing on my breath, my inhalation, holding up, and exhalation. That is how my mind, totally, I experienced this importance of technique in prayer. I learned the technique in prayer. That is how I started focusing on my breath and then my body. All these included led me to meditation better because of all those things. To me personally, it may not be the same case for every person, but to me personally, those added me to focus more in meditation, even though I get distracted every now and then with other thoughts and, all the other come and go, but still that helped me a lot, that praying and all that stuff. I see
Yes.
the benefit of Raja Yoga.
One of the aspects of technique is brevity. There's an aphorism in English, a proverb. Brevity is the soul of wit. Wit means applied intelligence. We find that most really good prayers are short. The Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Very short. And if you read Buckminster Fuller's unpacking and exposition of it, it runs on for 20 some odd pages. It's a what we would call a bhashya, an exposition. So technique is important. Swami Prabhavananda tried throughout this book to avoid the word discipline wherever he could, because we have such a negative reaction to the word discipline in our modern society. It implies compulsion and all those things that he talked about earlier in chapter 1. But this is why he uses the word here, technique. So we learn the technique of prayer, which is focus, brevity, and earnestness. As Nisargadatta Maharaj said, everything yields to earnestness. Everything yields to earnestness. So a successful prayer is earnest, focused, and relatively brief. Anything more from anyone about any of that? All right, please read it again.
I will read one more time this paragraph, Brother Shankara. No one who follows a truly religious path can do so without love, discrimination, and dedicated action. No one can dispense with meditation altogether. Love without discrimination lapses into sentimentality. Discrimination without love leads to spiritual pride. And we are all involved in action, like fire, like fire and smoke. Christianity, for example, is preeminently a bhakti approach to God. Yet, among its saints, we find such jnana types as Thomas Aquinas and such karma yogis as Vincent de Paul.
And such bhaktas as Saint Teresa of Avila.
It is all a matter of emphasis. And in the last analysis, each one of us has his or her own particular blend of yogas. But the observance of the limbs of yoga is essential, no matter which yoga one follows. On the subject of Bhakti Yoga, it is worth quoting a recorded conversation between Sri Ramakrishna and one of his pupils. Pupil, sir, is God with form or he is formless? Sri Ramakrishna answered, none can say with finality that he is this and nothing else. He is formless, and again he is with forms. For a devotee, he assumes forms. He is formless to the jnani, who, following the path of discrimination, has experienced in his inner being the nothingness of his ego and of the world of appearance. They are like a dream. He realizes Brahman in his own inner consciousness. Words fail to express that reality. To the devotee, the world is real, a creation of God, and himself also real as a separate entity. To the devotee, God appears as a personal being. Do you know what it is like? Compare Brahman to an ocean that is shoreless. Through the cooling influence, as it were, of the devotee's intense love, the formless water has frozen at places into ice blocks. That is to say, God sometimes reveals himself as a person and with forms to his devotees. Again, with the rising of the sun of knowledge, the ice blocks melt away. Then one does not see him as a person, nor does one see his forms. Who is there then to describe whom? The ego then has completely disappeared. I can read this one more time, Ramakrishna's answer to
But
the student, if you want to.
let's just see if there's any reaction.
Sure.
What was said as you
Very
read it the first time. Any comments or concerns or questions about what Sri Ramakrishna has said?
Shankar, I was listening to Osho yesterday and forgot whom he was referring. And when he got enlightened, he asked two questions. What happened? And the second was, whom did it happen to? Because then he didn't know who he was. So and that became so clear here when it said that who is there then to describe whom? And the ego then has completely disappeared. So
Yes.
I get that meaning, like related to that.
Well, when the ego disappears, this is what happens when there are no more mental modifications, vrittis, in the mind stuff, the citta. The ego and all that goes with it, all the baggage that is part of our experience of ourselves as an egoic being, it all disappears. What replaces it is indescribable, not because it isn't a reality. It is a reality. It is that formless reality. But there is no ego. There is no mind. There is no knower to experience it in the way that we experience our everyday reality in the waking, dreaming, and dreamless sleep states. So we can describe each of those, even if we describe the dreamless sleep as saying, oh, I wasn't aware of anything, but I woke up feeling so refreshed. So this formless state we often hear Haima talk about this, it's an experience of hers, that the divine being, the divine presence, carries us when we can't carry ourselves. It's metaphorized by this story of walking on a beach. And the person is speaking to Christ, the person who's walking with Christ. And he says, well, Lord, I see two pairs of footprints, and then only one set of footprints. Where were you then? And the Lord says to that person, oh, that's when I was carrying you. You weren't able to walk on your own, so I was carrying you. Now, during that time that that person is being carried, it could be because of some physical disability, but it could also be because they are absorbed. And the formless, having taken form, is carrying that soul forward. At the end of this book, we'll see that there is a description of that state. And it was very beautifully written of in Swami Vivekananda's interpretation and commentary that he published as the book Raja Yoga. It's in the last few pages, the last 4 pages of the book. There's a description of what happens as we're being carried along. So, and then ultimately, when there is no ego, there is no form. And so the formless, the form melts back into the formless. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Anything else from anyone?
Are you saying that when the ego is mastered, the form disappears or no
When the
longer?
ego is what again? I'm sorry, I missed that word.
When the ego is mastered,
When the ego is mastered, then we live more effectively and efficiently. Pablo Casals has mastered his ego. He no longer is slave to his desires and the wishes of his ego. He can practice at age 93, 6 to 8 hours a day. I use that metaphor because I know you'll understand it as a musician. Now, when the ego is mastered, then it becomes the mature ego. No, that will be the highest form. Then one becomes the expert dancer or expert singer. These are 2 metaphors that Sri Ramakrishna uses. When the ego disappears, your universe disappears. There's nothing to be known or mastered. All the mastery is behind you. And this is the end of the 6th limb of yoga, this mastery. And as Patanjali says, the first 6 limbs of yoga are something that you do. The last 2 are something that happens to you. And that's when you experience the highest form of samadhi. And I say experience, and of course, every time I say that, I have to stop and correct myself. It's just a clumsy way of talking. There is no experiencer there, so there's no experience. It's a state of being. And in that state of being, you become kaivalya, independent. Who becomes that? There's no way of saying who, but there is something there. It is the divine being. It is Brahman. It is Nirguna Atman. And so those who return from that state can teach you not what it is, but how to get there. And that's what each of these workbooks is, how to get there.
So you're not saying that if the ego is mastered, the body must disappear, or
No.
you can no longer be embodied.
No,
Yeah, good. Okay.
absolutely not.
Okay.
No, as a matter of fact, it's just the highest form of embodiment.
Right.
This is the end of that book, Divine Grace. To
Okay.
become fully human is to become fully divine.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you weren't saying that.
No, sirree.
Okay.
No, we can be divine and remain embodied. We can be fully divine and remain embodied. It's not the desire of the jnani. But it is the desire of the bhakta, the karmi, and the raja yogi. And the raja yogi may become kaivalya, and then they return to embodiment voluntarily. They actually can manifest a body at will. And Patanjali discusses this. And this is, of course, what Jesus Christ did. There's no mystery about it. He simply reanimated that body. He had departed from it. And the spirit had departed from it. And he came back, reanimated it, and continued its work for some time. Sri Ramakrishna was on his deathbed. He was no longer able to really move. And yet, his awareness made him know that a group of his young direct disciples that were going to become monastics, and later on, they were gathered, half a dozen of them were gathered sitting around a tree. They were being approached by a black cobra. A black cobra is a kind of cobra that will stalk you and strike you even though you're not menacing it. Sri Ramakrishna rose from his bed, ran downstairs, made himself invisible to these 6 young men, and told the cobra to go away and not bite them. He was returning to his bed up the stairs. Holy Mother saw him, which is why we know this story. And he said, "Oh, you have seen." She said, "Yes." And then he explained to her what he had been doing, which is why we have this story. Now, I'm not asking you to believe these stories. I'm not asking you to be credulous. I'm saying if you pursue this spiritual path, you may become willing to believe the power of a yogi, of a divine being. And Patanjali describes it in exquisite detail in this book, what the yogi becomes capable of. And it's not a spiritual power. It is a psychic power. It is a power of the psyche, which is part of the mind, and which is, again, not within the body. As we'll see when reading the powers section, what the yogi does is focus that psychic energy from outside the body on some part of the body, and that part of the body then enables the yogi to manifest a particular psychic power. Any comments or questions from anyone?
Well, I have a question from the overall methodology or workbook that you're suggesting. It seems like the workbook for Raja Yoga and the main principle in that workbook is the 8 limbs. On the other hand, the workbook on Bhakti Yoga, the principle there is devotion to God. Yet
Well,
I
if
see that
you read Narada's workbook, the Bhakti Sutras, you'll find it is very detailed in its description of method and process. It's not like Patanjali's, but it is a workbook nevertheless. And so is Adi Shankaracharya's Vivekachudamani, as is Sri Krishna's instructions on karma yoga. So it's actually it isn't the 8 limbs of yoga, as I said. Patanjali says clearly that it's the first 6 limbs that are something that you do. So it's the first 6 limbs that involve our self-effort and mastery of these techniques. I mean, just the idea of withdrawal from the senses, pratyahara. Until we begin to attempt it, we have no idea even what the hell he's talking about. Pratyahara is the pivot point. When you get to the ability to do pratyahara, withdrawal from the senses, then you can practice dharana, concentration. Until you've gained mastery of the senses, you're not able to concentrate long enough to really meditate. So does that address what you were talking about, Bhaskar?
Yeah, that's a very good clarification. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from anyone? All right, now listen to this other short prayer. Listen to this other short prayer in the context of technique. It's called flower offering. O dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, "Come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world." Om, Amen. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Peace, 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 and blessed beneficence be unto us and to all beings everywhere. O dearly beloved, make it so. That was composed as a gift to Swami Swahananda. He framed it and kept it in his room. When we think of what we truly want, what do we truly want? We want real happiness, real contentment, and real freedom. That happiness and contentment are the goal of each and every one of the yogas. Do this, Vivekananda says, and be free. Free of what? Free of limitation. Time, space, and causation, and our involvement in it, is a system, a very sophisticated system of limitation. We imposed it on ourselves as the divine being. Why cannot be said? Swami Sarvapriyananda was asked, why? And he said, speaking to the divine presence in its fullest sense, and it's therefore genderless, he said, because it can. And so slowly and slowly, we find our way out of the dark forest that we created, this jungle world. If you want out, Swami Vivekananda brought us these 4 ways of going out. Do this by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, one or more or all 4 of these, and be free. And each of us knows what we mean by freedom. We know it in the depth of our being. And what we see as we begin to practice spiritual discipline is I have misunderstood, and therefore I've been looking for love and freedom in all the wrong places. And by wrong, we don't mean bad. We just mean mistaken. Any comments or questions or thoughts from anyone?
I have something I'd like to share.
Please do.
I try never to make a rule of anything, because I find that the minute you make a rule, circumstance will defy you and challenge you with that. But there's one thing I have made a rule from that I have not been challenged at all. And that is I'd never pray for anything for myself. And I made that rule because I feel that God gave us a body, a mind, talents, and he gave us the ability to choose. So we are equipped to achieve anything that we desire ourselves. So that there's no need to ask for divine help with it, because if we're to have it, no obstruction will be placed in front of us.
This is, as defined by Joseph Campbell, this is the hero's stance. And one of the things that we find in the stories of the heroes is that somehow they are helped. They don't have to pray for it. When they come to that point where their powers as understood and practiced by they themselves are not up to the task. Something happens, and they get past that obstacle. So yes, Robert, absolutely. But we must not make that a rule for everyone. That then becomes dogma. People can pour out their heart, as Holy Mother said, when you are in distress, remember you have a mother. And when I am called on by name, I cannot hold myself back. So I address you in admiration and reverence for that hero's stance, and your uniqueness manifests itself again, but it certainly is not for everyone. We are free to pray for what we want.
But I noticed in the beginning of this session, you made a statement to Kenneth about there are no secrets there where you are. and I was in agreement with that 100%. And that is a demonstration of what I just said, what I said earlier.
Yes. All right, dears. We're definitely at the deep end of the pool here. This is not wading waters. But what joy. Because when you sit on the bottom of the pool at the deep end, you're immersed in silence and serenity. And you see everything that's going on the surface of the pool in an entirely different way. It all seems to be secondary details. So, what a joy to be with you. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Abir Moiti. Oh, dearly beloved, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from this realm of endless noise and relentless deception to thine abode of silence, serenity, clarity, and peace. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting shining presence. Om Hari Om Tat Sat. Oh, dearly beloved, make it so. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Durga Durga Durga. May we be safe, may we be healthy, may we be cheerful, may we have peace of mind, may we know we are always in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. Hari Om Tat Sat. Any final thought from anyone? Anything at all from anyone? All right, dears. Until tomorrow, when we'll address the question, must a karma yogi practice meditation? And if you read your newsletter, the description of the talk that's in there, it's an interesting answer. All right. Until tomorrow morning, for those of you who decide to join us, as always, what a joy to be among you. What a joy to share this together. Jai, 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 the Divine Presence.